All right, let's call to order. We'll call to order the meeting for the Colerain BZA slated for Wednesday, July the 20th. Or excuse me, we're not July 24th today, August the 28th, 2019. If you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those who are not familiar with the board's process, a brief explanation will be in order. A detailed explanation is on the back of your agenda in this evening. The sequence of events is as follows. Appeals will be heard first. Other business of the board will follow the hearing of appeals. You're welcome to stay for those that entire meeting, but you're not required to do so. All who speak or testify before the board will be sworn in. This may be done in either a group or individually. Anyone addressing the board is requested to use the speaker stand, and each person is asked to give his or her name and supply the address when testifying first. Our meetings are recorded, so anyone speaking may be cross-examined by an attorney. All documents presented for each case may be accepted by the board, and the chairman will rule whether the additional items being offered will be accepted or rejected. The person presenting each case may also withdraw a document. Each case will be heard first, presented by staff using the zoning administrator. And once the BZA staff presentation is complete, the appellant will have the opportunity to present their case. Following the appellant's presentation, the chairman will ask for anyone opposed to the appeal to speak. And in some instances, time limits may be placed on the presentation. Next, the board will motion to close the public portion of the hearing. Then individual board members will begin with their questions, and board members will ask individuals who testified to return to the speaker's podium, or the speaker podium. Following the board's question, a motion and a second will be made by the member of the board to either approve or deny the appeal. It's important to note that this vote was called a straw vote. The votes will bring forth a resolution. Actually, it brings forth the resolution immediately. They will issue the certificate in the office. Finally, with respect to the process of one another is paramount. The deliberation in each case is taken seriously by the board. Likewise, it is the expectation that respect be afforded to everyone, regardless of the emotion involved. No disruptive behavior will be tolerated, and this extends to all who testify as well as members of the audience. Anyone being disruptive will be asked to leave the hearing room. We will need to do a roll call.
Mr. Bartold? Here. Mr. Hill?
Present.
Mr. Roberto?
Present.
Mr. Reinger?
Here.
Ms. Wilson?
And as Ms. Wilson is vacant, we will please call our alternate. Mr. Shep. Mr. Shep. Thanks. So before we start the process, we'll need to swear in all those that plan to speak this evening. If you please stand and raise your right hand. You swear to affirm that everything you say before the Board of Zoning Appeals that is the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Say I do. Thank you. You may be seated. All right. So our first case this evening. Actually, I need some notes for tonight's schedule. Has anybody got a schedule I can have?
You mean the agenda?
Yeah, thank you. All right, so our first case will be BZA 2019-006. This is a request for variance for section 8.4.2, section C, 12, for the sections 12.11.1, subsection A, number 1, for section 12.9.4, subsection D, for section 13.3.2, section A, or subsection A, and then also for section 14.6.2, subsection B, and then section 15.8.3, subsection G, number 1, and for 15.8.3, subsection G3, for a new Speedway gas station located on 11885 Hamilton Avenue. The owner and applicant is Jonathan Watcher of AICP and Emro Marketing Company. Does the staff have a presentation?
Yes, we do.
Thank you.
This property is located at the southwest corner of Hamilton Avenue and East Kemper Road. It currently contains an older gas station. It's a rich oil gas station. It's kind of in front of where the former Marsh store used to be. At this point, Hamilton Avenue is actually the boundary line for Colerain Township. Directly across the street is Springfield Township. To the north, there's some auto-related type uses. There's a restaurant. The property is Zone B2, which is General Commercial District. This is the site, and the plan is to completely demolish everything that you see in the way of structures. The building, the canopies, the freestanding sign. It also involves the demolition of the Marsh sign on the adjacent property that's currently adjacent. A lot of this is non-conforming. It was built prior to our current site development regulations. The redevelopment of the property is going to comply with the vast majority of the site development regulations, except for the items that you have before you tonight. Staff had reviewed this application for a zoning certificate and denied the application based on violations of 7 sections of code that the chairman just read. And we'll go through those. This is the site plan for the site. The red line represents the current boundaries for where the gas station is. They propose to purchase to the green line. As of note, the previous red line property is less than an acre. That would have been also a violation of the zoning code. This puts it well over an acre, so site size will comply. To the west, actually, which is to the top of the screen in this picture, is a stormwater detention basin that drains the parking lot for that Marsh Shopping Center. That is probably one of the barriers to trying to meet some of this lot depth. If they are purchasing property off the Marsh, the question is, could they buy more property and do away with some of the variance requests? But that stormwater detention basin and the control flow facilities would be a somewhat big obstacle to overcome. With the development of this, the previous site has no inner flow of traffic between that Marsh Shopping Center. This particular plan has 2 points of access to that shopping center. It should be noted that there's currently no public sidewalks on Kemper Road. They will be putting in public sidewalks for that frontage. There's quite a few other things that are being corrected as part of this development plan. The first variance request that we're looking at is the pump canopy. The requirement is that it meets the 50-foot setback, which is the same as the actual building setback. The red line represents where that 50-foot setback would be, and you can see that the canopy extends into that setback on both the Kemper side and on the Hamilton Avenue side. There's kind of an offset in the right-of-way on Hamilton Avenue that results in that kind of intrusion into the setback. The next item is that, well, I kind of skipped, I guess, in the order. There's a requirement that you have to have a tree island for every 15 parking spaces in a row. There's actually 20 spaces in a row in front of the building. So there should be a tree island in that. As of note, that would add another shade tree. Currently, there's proposed to have 17 shade trees and some evergreens and shrubs, and 1 additional tree would be required. Currently, there's no trees on the site. There is a variance request for maximum lighting levels. We have minimums, maximums, and then averages across the site. The areas that are circled exceed the maximums, and that's the area directly behind the building. the areas at all three entry points to the property, and also the area directly under the canopy exceeds the maximum allowances. Because of those maximum allowances being exceeded, the average across the site is also exceeded. Under the canopy, you can only have up to 10-foot candles, and it's about 15 at those locations. Generally, also at the site in a general commercial district where you're abutting general commercial, it's 0.3-foot candles, and they're up to about 5 at the entries, and also behind the building itself. Probably should be noted with the service entrance to the building is out the rear, and there's a sidewalk to the dumpster, and there's probably a need for some additional lighting to get to the dumpster. It's a little difficult on the justification for total foot candles, except that this is a 24/7 operation. There's a need for the people in the building to be able to see what's going on under the canopy as people are fueling at night. And so that's the claim of hardship for that particular thing. Also, the additional at the driveway entrances, just so people don't miss the driveway entrances. There is a requirement that you have to have for every 40 feet of wall length a physical break in the wall plane, a 2-foot offset. The entry feature does provide that 2-foot offset, but the area to the left of the entry exceeds that 40-foot maximum. I believe that's 57, 58 feet, something like that. So that is also a variance request. And signage. Wall signage allowance is based on the front footage of the building, and that signage can be applied to either the building or the pump canopy, or both, just so it doesn't exceed the allowance. That is 144 square feet is permitted, 167.5 is proposed. So it's a 23.5 square foot variance request. I did show also the freestanding sign. That is not a part of the variance request. That is 15 foot high and 150 square feet, which is the maximum allowance for this zone classification. So there is an allowance for both freestanding signs and wall-mounted and canopy signs. Staff findings are that the property in question would likely yield a reasonable return without the variances. The site can contain or continue to be used for an auto fuel station in its current condition as a non-conforming development. Second, the variances requested are substantial since allowances for setbacks, architectural design, lighting, parking, landscaping, and signs are highly desirable for new developments. Third, granting of the variance would grant consideration that is not available to the property owners in the neighborhood. Item 4, the granting of the variance would probably not have a negative impact on neighboring properties and would create a precedent to allow for variances if requested by neighboring properties. Number 5, approval of the variances would not affect the delivery of governmental services. Number 6, there are no topographic issues related to this property which would constrain the reasonable application of the regulations without additional expenses. I would note that an exception to that could be that stormwater detention basin to the rear of the proposed building. And number 7, by taking into consideration the benefits to the applicant, if the variances are granted, is weighed against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighboring neighborhood and broader community, staff finds that substantial justice would be done by not granting the variances for landscaping and signs, but approval of the remaining variances as recommended. And the recommendation of staff. And we took all 7 basically sections of code and did individual recommendations on those. And If you're in agreement with staff on all of them, obviously, you could take a motion to accept staff recommendation. If you choose to depart from it, it might be useful for you to take those one at a time and separate them out, just to let you know. Number one is approval of the variance request from section 8.4.2C to allow for the proposed canopy to extend into the front yard as much as 12 feet per the plan submitted. One of the factors considered in that is it's not an actual enclosed structure. It's basically a roof that is open underneath. And also there is an irregular right-of-way on at least the Hamilton Avenue frontage. Number two, approval of the variance request from section 12.11.1A1 to allow the area to the left of the front door to have a wall plane of 57 feet without a wall plane break. I'm not sure how relevant it's considered to be. A exact duplicate of this was approved for Colerain Avenue between the Rumpke headquarters and the new auto zone. There's a proposal to demolish and redevelop that site. That particular site is in a planned zoning district, so that plan had to go through our zoning commission versus Board of Zoning Appeals. Zoning Commission did grant that particular variance on that site. Not that that obligates you, it's just a piece of information.
Sure.
The variance request from section 12.9.4D to allow for light levels to exceed the maximum allowance for the property lines, building entries, and average across the site per the photometric plan submitted. Number four, approval of the variance request for section 13.3.2A to allow for 7 fewer parking spaces than allowed by code. The note is the following one deals with that tree island. If the tree island is included, I believe there's enough space on the site to add an additional parking space to compensate for that tree island. So that number could remain the same, or based on discussion, it could be reduced by 1. This is a similar variance to the one on Colerain Avenue that Zoning Commission granted. They granted fewer parking spaces. The idea is that most of the traffic is parked at the fuel pumps itself. And we require parking spaces separate from the fuel pumps for the fuel pumps as part of our code. And that tends to be a little excessive. Number
6.
C, 5. Variance restricting, number of parking spaces. Did I not have the tree island in here?
That was number 5.
Oh, that was number 4, okay.
Oh, you were talking.
Number 5 is a tree island.
5 is tree island, okay, I'm sorry, back on track. Denial of the variance from section 14.6.2B restricting the number of parking spaces in a row without a tree island, you have to be 15 spaces. Number 6, denial of the variance request restricting the total amount of wall and canopy signs to a maximum of 144 square feet based on the building street frontage. I think we saw from the size, or from the illustrations, the size of the signs on that canopy are quite large. We're just asking that they comply by another 23 feet reduction from where they are now. And then lastly, denial of the variance request from section 15.8.3G3, restricting the total amount of wall and canopy signs for a single property to the maximum of 150 square feet. So with all those variance
I
requests,
had a question for you on, what's the difference? Why are you distinguishing between 6 and 7?
there are 2 different criteria. Any site, regardless of how big the building is, how much street frontage it has, they're capped at 150 square feet. Okay. They're proposing more. Okay. So there's two layers of caps, and they're sort of over both.
Okay.
That's why.
Very good. Is the applicant present?
Good evening, my name is Jonathan Woker. I'm with McBride Colerain. I'm a planner representing Speedway. My address is 5721 Dragon Way, Suite 300, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45227. And I have Christopher Duffy here with me as well. He is a representative of Speedway as a construction manager. Mr. Kohler went through the application in great detail. I just want to kind of cover a couple of the items for that, and then if I don't go in enough detail, I can certainly go back. As you saw in the staff report, staff supports the requested variances with the exception of the signage and the landscape island. Briefly, we do have a situation where an existing property is non-conforming, and we are purchasing additional land. There is a pretty substantial detention basin behind us that does create a physical hardship for us to build further away from Hamilton Avenue. Does create a situation that Mr. Kohler referenced, and we believe that is a consideration here. So with the staff's recommendation, they are recommending approval of the variances for the parking. We do think that it's appropriate to count the number of spaces at the dispenser islands, and when you count that, we would have approximately 40 parking spaces, because there's 16 spaces there. We also believe that the lighting is important. It provides a safety issue for us. We do have a rear door, and then the lighting areas where you're seeing the excessive or the higher numbers are under the canopy and at the driveways. Those are areas of safety for us. I will point out that, and for the fueling location as well. So it is a 24-hour store, as mentioned, and it's important for us to have that illumination. And we feel we're a unique type of use for that consideration. We are requesting that the board grant a variance for the landscape island. We do have 20 parking spaces in front of the store. It's not a long run of parking. By installing that island, we would be reducing one more parking space. We feel that it's important to have that additional parking in front of the store. We do have landscape islands at either end of that 20-foot or 20-space parking stalls. So we do have landscaping at that area and also in the vicinity of the parking area. And we feel that installing that landscape island could interfere with the flow of traffic and overall circulation. It's a relatively small site, and we feel that it's appropriate to grant the variance for that landscape island. Regarding the sign area, what we've presented is Speedway's preferred standard development sign package. What this has, we have 2 signs on the store. I think when you look at the application on paper, it sounds like a lot of signs. I think when you look at it on the sign plan or on the building elevations, it's not a lot of signs. And part of that is because the signage is on the canopy, and what we've proposed is a sign plan that would direct signs to various traffic flows. So a sign would face northbound Hamilton, southbound Hamilton. We're also at a corner lot, so it would face incoming traffic on Kemper, as well as across the street coming in that direction. So we feel that when you look at the building elevation and the overall canopy plan, that it's an appropriate sign package, and that it's well balanced and not excessive. again, especially considering that you've got a canopy building and a store building for that. So we would request the board's approval for those two variances, which really are kind of the same variance. So we're asking for a variance for 23.5 square feet of additional sign area, which would allow us to appropriately market this store. So we feel that the combination of variances allow us to redevelop this site. The existing property is aged. It's due for redevelopment, and by buying this additional property, it allows us to do that. I can go into more detail if you have questions about the elevation and the facade and the canopy setbacks, but I think Mr. Kohler did a pretty thorough job of presenting that information. So that's my presentation, and I will try and answer questions if you have it.
Well, we'll ask questions later. At this point, we're just making presentations. Thank you. Anyone else speaking in favor? I see none. Anyone speaking in opposition? I see none. I have a motion to close the public portion.
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, motion and second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bartolt,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Reinger,
Aye.
Mr. Shupp,
Aye.
Mr. Roberto.
Yes. Okay. All right, Mr. Shupp, we'll start off with you as far as questions.
I really don't have any yet.
Okay, Mr. Reininger?
I have some questions, sir. Talk to me a little bit about remediation of the catch basin.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
There is a catch basin that you're going to move your property line into that is on, I don't know which is,
Kemper Road side.
the upper right side of the property. Are you going to how are you going to get, is the water going to interfere with your operation because it's going to drain out of the parking lot if you don't do something?
So the way the property line has been drawn is intentional to avoid that drainage basin. So the drainage basin serves the marsh property, the former marsh property, I should say,
Yep.
and does not drain the property that we are purchasing.
Okay.
So the intent would be to keep the basin the way it is. It would remain being owned by the current property owner. And we've had initial discussions with the Hamilton County Engineer's Office Public Works about that. So our detention would not go to that basin. We would be controlling it and releasing it more to the drainage in the street.
On signage, it's fortunate that you actually front on two streets, Kemper and Hamilton, which gives you the ability to put signage on two distinct sides. Those of you that have been in front of the board before know that we are pretty conscious of what signage we can allow in terms of size. I would really like to see the marquee sign or the sign that's standalone and the other signage conform with the maximum amount allowable underneath our zoning. It is a small reduction in signage, but I understand that you don't front an expressway, and there's a stoplight out there, so folks aren't going to be zipping by at 60 miles an hour. And it is your standard corporate signage that goes up there. But I would like some consideration to get the signage down to what our zoning permits. It is a small reduction. I don't think it's going to affect your business, but it will not set a precedent because I don't believe there's been anyone before the board in the last few years that feels that their signs are too small. Everyone wants a bigger sign, and that's why we have guidelines to kind of bring it down. I'd like to have some consideration on that, if at all possible. The landscape island and the parking was the other concern. I appreciate the landscape islands that you've got on each end of your parking in front of your store. I'm not really going to push on that. It would be perhaps a trade-off I don't know what the sidewalk area in front of your store is, to put a couple of large floral planters with bushes in on the sidewalk, leave the parking available, but just break up the, that wall plane with some, with anything green. I mean, I won't push for the extra parking island. I would suggest you look at some way to give you some foliage in front of that building.
May I respond?
Yeah, that's your comment, yeah, Mr. Chair.
Okay. You can address that.
So we do propose some small landscape areas adjacent to the building. One of the township's code is to have, various elements, and Mr. Kohler's showing that on the slide here too. So we will have some landscape areas here, some raised landscape beds adjacent to this entry, and we would be able to install some landscaping, behind this sidewalk. So we have, I believe it's a 7-foot sidewalk next to the, so we could add some landscaping on this side.
I would look for that for a trade-off for the parking space.
Okay. Mr. Hill?
I would echo what he said in terms of, I really don't have any issues with eliminating one parking spot or eliminating the landscape island, but I would like to see those plantings that would be required there placed somewhere on the site. That's all that I have.
Mr. Brettel?
Question on the signage. So on the elevations, on the extreme left, there's some sort of sign, but it doesn't count. Is that correct, Marty?
Is that an exit sign?
No, is it a message board or something?
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Oh, yes, that does count.
Oh, it is part of the calculations? Okay. So are the sizes of the speedway signs typical for any speedway?
They are, I mean, there are,
Or do they change based on?
they don't, I mean, this would be, there are some canopy fascias that have a different size, but that's not a good option here. That basically we would have to, if we don't grant this obtain this variance, then we would look at some combination of changes. And hopefully it's obvious. I mean, it's important enough to us to ask for this and pursue the variance, and I respect the township's regulations, but, clearly we thought it was important enough to ask for each of these signs, and if the answer is no, then we'll have to do some calculation to figure out what changes we make. I would point out that the ground sign does comply with code, and we are removing a rather substantial marsh sign that really doesn't get any credit here, but the fact is we are removing that, so you will be losing more than 150 square feet by taking that down when we're gone.
So your sign vendor has the option of tweaking? It's not like a stock size that is made in the factory and has to be that size. They can tweak it?
I'm sorry, I probably didn't answer that right. These are stock sizes.
Okay.
We would have to do some removal of signs to do what you're asking for. So it would be difficult for us. For example, this sign that you question is 40 square feet. And so it doesn't come in 32.
Right.
So, or at least not to us. So, this sign is 11 square feet. And so we don't have a 9. So, it would have to be some combination of removal if the board, depends on how you act.
Okay, that's all I have.
So I was going to ask kind of similar, because I know, anytime you make anything custom, now you're creating a hardship. And, so I guess the question, could you lose the 40 square foot piece that's on the face of the building and still accommodate, the overhead signage? 'Cause that would be my resolution if I was stuck and we voted no against you. That's what I would do. Is that what your guys' intent then would be to do?
Well,
To satisfy this need if we said no?
we would go back to our operations team and tell them that They asked us to ask for the 167.5, and if the answer is no, then we would have to present to them that they would have some decisions to make, which is more important in this hierarchy of signage, and, you know, the changes would go from there. So I'm not really able to tell you which revisions would be made, but, you know,
Right.
once you give me a cap number, then that would be, you know, 162 is better than 144, 150 is better than 144. So the more you give me, the better I
And
will.
we'll move on from that, so, because it's semantics. So how does this reflect or mirror the Colerain Avenue signage? Is it the similar?
You know, I'd have to check. The ground sign's slightly larger because we're in a PUD in that location,
Okay.
up at Generations Drive. That store at Generations Drive has a slightly, it's got a cafe style to it.
Sure.
Because we have outdoor seating, which was part of what we presented to the township. So the S's that are shown here are actually a cafe and is larger.
Okay.
So, and then in that situation, we also have commercial fueling lanes, so we have truck lanes behind. So we have more signage at the Colerain location as an aggregate than is presented here.
Okay, I'll rephrase the question.
Okay.
The speedways that are used on the sign at Colerain, the name Speedway, are they identical?
They are the same size.
Enough said for me.
One more thing.
Sure.
And then how big did you say the S is in square footage?
So these S's are 11
11
square feet.
Oh, only 11, because I was just wondering, the one on the west side doesn't do a whole lot, which is your second from the top there, that one? I mean, but it's only 11 square feet.
Get some half.
People who run Speedway believe that that sign is important, and,
Yeah.
you know, again, that's why we're here to ask for it.
I always take the position, people in the neighborhood know there's a gas station there. I mean, they're not gonna drive down, oh, where's that Speedway again? You know,
This will be off, you know, this is gonna be a substantial improvement from what's there, you know.
that's what I mean, everybody will know it's a gas station, so, but, okay. Back to you.
And I'll go back to, I'll reiterate, I'm agreement with removing the tree island if we will accommodate by putting some more foliage or trees somewhere else.
Sure, we can work with staff on that if.
All right. Lighting makes sense. I mean, you're lighting streetway, you're lighting underneath the canopy, and you're lighting a detention pond, so it's really, I see no problem there. And I really don't, for me, I can't understand what the break in the wall on the plane does for us. You might explain to me why we have to have a break in the wall on the plane? Is it because you get hypnotized or what? But
It's an architectural thing.
yeah, I know. It's just there's breaks in the plane because they got ice machines outside. So.
Break up the monotony of the wall,
Yeah.
basically.
All right, very good. Anybody have any other questions?
Nope.
No, sure. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, how are we going to proceed with voting per variance recommendation or doing the whole thing as a block?
Well, if you're gonna defer from what staff recommendation is, then we will do them individually. If you're gonna make a recommendation based upon what the staff has suggested, then we can just do it as that.
I would suggest we do them individually then.
Okay? All right, so item number 1, which is the variance request for section 8.4.2, allow the proposed canopy to extend into the front yard as much as 12 feet per the plan submitted. Can we have a recommendation for that?
I'll make a motion to approve that variance.
Motion's been made. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have Mr. Hill made the second.
Okay.
And roll call vote, please.
Mr. Bartolt,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Roberto,
Yes.
I'm sorry,
I know.
Mr. Reinger,
Aye.
Mr. Shep.
Aye.
All right, so item number 2 in our approval or our disapproval would be the variance request for section 12.11.1, subsection A, number 1, to allow the area at the left of the door to have a wall plane of 57 feet long without a break in its wall plane. Do I have a recommendation or
So move.
To approve?
to approve? Okay, so Mr. Reiner has made a recommendation to approve.
I'll second.
We have a second. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Shep,
Aye.
Mr. Reinger.
Aye.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Mr. Berthold.
Yes.
Mr. Roberto.
Yes. Item number 3 is the variance request for section 12.9.4 subsection D to allow the light levels to exceed the maximum allowance for property lines, building entries, and an average across the side of the photometric plan submitted. Do we have a,
I'll make a motion to approve the variance.
thank you.
I'll second.
Motion and second made. We have a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Mr. Berthold.
Yes.
Mr. Shup.
Aye.
Mr. Reinger.
Aye.
Mr. Roberto.
Yes. Number 4, the variance request for section 13.3.2 subsection A to allow for 7 fewer parking spaces allowed by code.
Motion to approve.
Motion second.
I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Reinger.
Aye.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Mr. Berthold.
Yes.
Mr. Shup.
Aye.
Mr. Roberto.
Yes. Number 5, the variance request for section 14.6.2 subsection B, restricting the number of parking spaces in a row without a tree island to 15 spaces.
I'll make a motion to approve with the condition that the plantings that would be required in that tree island be placed somewhere else on the site.
I'll second.
Okay, a motion and a second have been made to approve with stipulations. We have a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Shup.
Aye.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Mr. Berthold.
Yes.
Mr. Reinger.
Aye.
Mr. Roberto.
Aye. Number 6 in our request is the variance request for section 15.8.3, subsection G, number 1, restricting the total amount of wall and canopy sign to a maximum of 144 square feet based on the building street frontage. Do I have a motion?
The motion is for denial of that variance request, and I will make a motion to deny the variance request.
Okay, so a motion to deny has been made. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second has been made. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Berthold.
Yes.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Mr. Reinger.
Aye.
Mr. Shup.
Aye.
Mr. Roberto.
No. Denial. Number 7, the denial, or excuse me, I'm just reading the notes, guys, sorry. The variance request for section 15.8.3, G, number 3, restricting the total amount of wall canopy sign for a single property to a maximum of 150 square feet. We have a motion.
I'll make a motion to deny the variance request.
Okay, motion been made. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, motion and second. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Shup.
Aye.
Mr. Reinger.
Aye.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Mr. Berthold.
Yes.
Mr. Roberto.
Yes. All right, so you got your marching orders, guys. Thank you. All right, so our next case is BZA 2019-007. This is a request for appeal of an administrative decision to deny a non-conforming use certificate for storage of blacktopping equipment and commercial vehicles. The location of the property is 11850 Stone Mill Road. The applicant owner is Charles H. Bartlett Jr. and Lem Monroe and Beatrice Street. Okay. Does staff have a presentation?
Yes. This comes as administrative denial. We haven't seen a lot of these lately, but it's basically when we review zoning certificates, there is a disagreement with the applicant on the way that a certificate was interpreted or denied, or how the code was applied in this particular situation.
Okay.
This is a case where there was a business that was reported to our code enforcement officer. They investigated, determined that there was in fact a business going on at the property on Stone Mill. A violation notice was sent. After the violation notice was sent, the owner's representative applied for what's called a non-conforming certificate. And we've granted hundreds of these since the zoning code was adopted. And they're basically a certificate to to document that in fact a business had been legally established under the code at a certain point in time, but because of subsequent changes to the code became non-conforming at a later date. So that's really the review process for this. This property is zoned R2, which is a rural residential, it's called estate residential. Primarily permits single-family homes on large lots. There's conditional uses like churches, recreation, but it's primarily residential. Stone Mill Road is at the northern part of the township. It is east of US 27. Here's an aerial photograph of the property. It's pretty apparent to tell from the aerial photograph. There's quite a few vehicles stored on the site. There's material stored on the site. And the conclusion is there is a business. And based on the application, the owner's not refuting that there is a business. They are claiming that they are a grandfathered condition in this district. Here's a couple aerial photographs. One's from 1996, one from just this year. There is some expansion to it over time. Non-conforming uses, if they are documented, can be expanded with the approval of the Board of Zoning Appeals. There's no record that this property has ever gone to the Board of Zoning Appeals, except for there was a fence issue from many, many years ago that was denied, that has nothing to do with this. When the application came in for the non-conforming certificate, we went through the documentation, and there was a lot of information about what the owner claims happened in terms of a sequence of events, but there was no documentation that said that at any point in time they received a zoning certificate. Zoning certificates have been required for the establishment of virtually anything new as a land use since 1962. If a business were created prior to 1962, we had no zoning requirements. They're almost automatically given a non-conforming certificate. However, there is no claim that this was established before 1962. Our zone regulations, had to do a little research, but under the previous zone regulations, the property was zoned AA, which was also a rural residential, and to the left is the zoning map that was in effect back in the 1980s, shows the subject property. And then the permitted uses at that time was single-family dwellings. You can have private garages as defined by 3.45. Also, these sections are no longer applicable. This was repealed and replaced in 2006. There was an allowance for home occupations as well. Private garages, I had the definition, and it's very similar to the current definition of a private garage, that it's primarily for residential storage. No business or service connected directly or indirectly is allowed in a detached garage, and that's still true. Under home occupations, it cannot employ people on the premises other than family members and immediate occupants, shall not serve as a gathering point for employees engaged in or carrying on the business at the premises. I didn't highlight it, but number 3 says the use shall not generate pedestrian or vehicular traffic that is reasonable and normal to the district in which it's located. They do have commercial trucks on the property, which would not be allowed to be parked on residential properties. Number 7 is no accessory building or space of the principal building shall be used in conjunction with the home occupation. So the detached garages on this property could not be used as part of a business. Back in 2001, the township did issue a permit to construct a detached garage. And it's kind of hard to see on this, but it was applied for as a residential garage, and it was issued as a residential garage, detached. The applicant also provided some information, provided some photographs of the site. This has, looks like paving materials that have been dumped and stored on the site. There looks like there's a lot of unpaved area that's used for vehicular traffic. That is the building that was permitted as the residential garage. There's some commercial vehicles parked behind that. Other commercial equipment. This is a letter that was included in the application it was for a footer certification, but as you can see, it says residential garage. The plan that the applicant gave to us also notes that it's a residential garage. The site plan that was included with the building permit application says proposed residential garage. So the staff findings are the business of storage of blacktopping equipment and commercial vehicles was established after the initial adoption of the zoning in Colerain Township in 1962. Secondly, evidence submitted with the application for a nonconforming use certificate for an appeal to the Board of Zoning Appeals did not contain an indication that the storage of blacktopping equipment and commercial vehicles as a home occupation was lawfully created or issued a zoning certificate or was other legally recognized by Colerain Township. Thirdly, that evidence submitted for the adoption or with the application contained no proof that the storage of blacktopping equipment and commercial vehicles business was permitted by the zoning resolution at the time that it was established. As a matter of fact, our research indicates that it was specifically prohibited at the time that it was established. The current use of the property for storage of blacktopping equipment and commercial vehicles is in violation of the Colerain zoning resolution. With that said, the burden of proof is on the applicant to prove that this is in fact a legal business that has been operating with the approval under the zoning resolution. So staff's recommendation is for denial of the appeal of the administrative denial of the non-conforming use certificate.
Thank you.
Is there any questions?
Any questions? Okay, applicant of it, present?
Yeah, two main points that I'd like to make.
Can you please
And
introduce
address.
yourself and give us your address, please?
Pardon? Oh, my name is Charles Bartlett. I'm an attorney for the applicant.
Thanks, sir.
And this is Mr. Len Monroe. He is one of the co-trustees where the property is currently under a trust agreement, and he's one of two trustees, and he filed the application. But also present is Mr. Glenn Street. He was the previous title owner of the property and the purchaser of the property, and has continuously, since approximately 1983, which predates the 1985 date, has used this property to store his construction and blacktopping equipment on the property. And in fact, he has continuously used it, as the photographs show. What the photographs don't show is that the property is such a low elevation compared to the street that none of his equipment or the building that was built to store equipment at the request of Colerain Township is visible from the street. There are two other businesses up the street, a very short distance, within the same zone, that have equipment equipment stored right within plain view of the street. Now, they may have previously received certificates for non-conforming use, or they may have been grandfathered in. However, my client tells me that he was one of the construction companies that built that subdivision, put in the roads for the subdivision, and that as a trade-off for his services, he was given the opportunity to purchase these properties, the 2 parcels that he owns, on a land contract on or about 1983. Title was transferred to him on or about 1987. And subsequently there too, he built the garage, but he has always, the backside of his property where the equipment is stored is surrounded by woods. It's undeveloped property of the adjoining property owners. Even the gentleman who has property next door that complained and subsequently resulted in a citation, he cannot, because of trees, he cannot see the backside of my client's property. If we look at the home occupation requirements under 10.3.1, general provisions, I see nothing in here that would prevent him from having a home occupation under that provision. If you look at the section that was pointed out, shall the use, which is, I've got under subsection H under the current zoning ordinance, it says the use shall not generate pedestrian or vehicular traffic beyond that reasonably and normal to the district in which it is located. Now, I've been out on that street hundreds of times, and there's nothing unusual about a dump truck going up and down that street. It's a very busy residential neighborhood, and like I said, there are other businesses on that street, and that street is used as a byway for that part of Colerain Township. He's not operating the business such as there would be continuous use of his dump trucks or his trailers or hauling his blacktopping equipment. He does all of his business away from his residence. This is primarily his residence. He simply stores his trucks and his blacktopping equipment there. And at the request of Colerain Township, he had that garage built on the backside of the property below street level, and went through considerable expense on his part to make sure that his equipment did not disturb the looks of the neighborhood. Sure, when you look above it from an airplane, you can see the garage and you can see the trucks parked there. But from the street, you can't, it's totally invisible. You cannot see it from the street at all. And I've given pictures that are attached to our appeal that shows that it's a well-maintained residential home. It is primarily used by my client as his home. It's the only use for his business is the storage of the equipment, and he does some paperwork in his home for his business. But even if it were a business being operated or described in that fashion, it would be justified under that section of the regulations. The only part that I see that might be difficult is no accessory building or space outside of the principal building shall be used in conjunction with the home occupation. The only uses it has is, again, for storage of equipment, storage of trucks, which is not unusual for that area. And that building is far removed from the residence, and what has been described as construction debris, that's merely was landfill that was put there in order to facilitate that building being where it is and the parking space being there, he's not dumping construction material on his property. He used that to fortify the hillside and to allow for him to have that building in a parking space for his trucks below street level. So it's landfill used for construction purposes, not for dumping purposes. So it's not an eyesore, it's simply there to prevent the hill from sliding away, I would assume. Pardon? I'll let my client speak right now on behalf of himself and as to the history of his using that property to store his construction vehicle.
Before we proceed, have you signed in, sir? Did you sign in on the sign-in sheet?
Am I what?
Did you sign in on the sign-in sheet?
Didn't sign in with the sign?
Yes, and did you sign in, sir?
I signed it, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
This is Mr. Glenn Street. Did I state your name correctly?
Pretty close. Hey, I was working with Joe Wutzenbacher and Dottie Grooms. We done driveways and parking areas for them. They was property they was cutting up for selling this house out. They was gonna cut the property up and cut it up and make a subdivision out of it. So they told me that if I come in there and that's next to the street here, that little Timberwolf estate, right here, I cut this street in for them and done the excavating and grading for the engineer to come out and survey it, learn shad. Okay, so it wasn't cut up when we was doing that because he had to get it surveyed so it would meet Hamilton County's approval before they cut the property up and make it from a farmland use to commercial use. It was called farmland, agriculture. So what happened was I done the grading and stuff, and at a later date, when I got it paid off, he put the property in my name. He told me that I could do what I wanted to on it, that I had a right to park there and do what I wanted. I asked him specifically. He said yes.
And what have you done to improve the property since you paid it?
Well, I've done about what a normal household man would do. I fixed it up, built a house, cleaned it up, improved the community with it.
And I have photographs of the property and from the street. It's a beautiful home. It's a beautiful home on the inside.
Could you speak in the microphone, please?
I'm sorry. It's a beautiful home, well maintained. It is consistent with the neighborhood. This is Mr. Lem Monroe. Can you take us a photograph? If you want to give okay. He is the co-trustee.
Are these documents for us to keep, sir?
Yeah,
Will
you
be
can keep
submitting
those.
this?
So good evening.
So
My name is Lim
Before you
Street.
speak, then I just want to make sure we record it that we're adding these in the. So the applicant has submitted 4 photographs of the property, and we are reviewing those.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Lim Street. I'm a co-trustee at 11850 Stone Mill Road. Now, if you look at the Hamilton County Auditor website, it'll take you back to the whole duration of our history of the property, starting in the 90s. So if you could go to the auditor website and go to the property in the 90s, you'll see that there's dirt. You know, the house is small. It's not much to look at, but the surrounding area is also rural. We don't have any neighbors in a stone throw. My father, he graded all the properties for our neighbors before they even purchased their properties. So if you look at the time span, even just in a short time frame from the 90s to 2019, you can see that the property has become a nice place, a beautiful addition to the neighborhood. And if you look at the photos I show you, the first photo I showed you was directly from the road. So if you take note of the first photo, you'll see that There is no sign of construction equipment. It just looks like a typical residential home. If you look at the second photo, that's our second lot. That would be to the north, approximately to the northwest. That property also shields the construction activity that takes place at the bottom of the hill there. And if you just like Chuck Bartlett said here, looking at it in an aerial point of view, you can't really see the elevation, but like I said, you'd have to go to extreme measures. And actually, I want to state you'd have to severely invade our privacy to get a glimpse of what we're doing back there. So if you go back to the photo that you had before of the property, back the two aerial photos. So if you look at this image here on the left, it looks pretty much vacant. It looks like it's under construction. But if you look at the 2019 aerial photo, you see a lot of improvement on the property. You see the tree line is expanded. If you look to the north there, where all the trucks were backed into that hole there, you can see that the tree line is expanded, that the road is a little more present and in place. It's a little more fitting there, it looks a lot more like a home. If you look at the first one, it was under construction. He was still building it. He was still working on the properties around it. And if you look at 2019, you see it evolving into a beautiful home. You see it evolving into a nice addition to the neighborhood. Like Mr. Bartlett said, the trucks aren't typically on the property. The trucks travel very far and they stay on the work site. So they're not typically an issue. There are neighbors and everybody that move equipment up and down the road way more often than we do. So I wouldn't consider us so much of a burden. And that should be all I have to say for right now.
And I would also mention that the cars that you see in the second photo, those are cars that are parked in front of the residential garage. In the one to the 2019 aerial, you'll see a detached garage immediately behind the home. That's a residential garage. And the vehicles that are parked there are the family members that both live in the house or are visiting Mr. Street in his home. The commercial vehicles, the couple dump trucks and paving equipment, that's down below the hill in the garage that's up in the far right corner. Now that was the garage that was built at the request of Colerain Township, and my client was unaware that the engineer had put down that it was a residential garage. It was intended to be for storage of commercial equipment right from the get-go, and the fact that the engineer that obtained the permit put it down as a residential garage was an error, because it has never been used as a residential garage. And in fact, it was intended as a commercial garage.
I just have one more point to make. We were submitted these photos by the township. So if you just want to look through these photos, you probably have them on hand already.
How many are there?
I think these are
Same ones that we have.
Now, if you look at these photos,
Hold on a second, let me,
Are they the same ones that we already have?
these,
no, these were taken by the township. The ones I showed you were taken by me personally.
so, count how many are there, or are they the same as what we currently have in our packet?
They're not the ones that I provided in the field packet.
Okay.
They're different.
Correct. Yeah, so these photos were taken by the township from our neighboring property.
Okay, so,
Now-
hold on a second. So let me just
nine-
put in record there are
nine
9 additional photos that have been supplied that we'll submit into record. Sorry to interrupt, I just gotta
that's
make sure
okay.
it's legal.
That's fine. So if you look at these photos, you'll see multiple cars. We have quite a few residents at this house. All of the cars in the photos are all residents of the home. The only evidence you'll see of any type of business equipment is a paver in our backyard. Now that paver was only briefly there for probably a couple weeks. We were planning on doing some pavement work on our front yard. We were planning on resurfacing our driveway and further improving our home. When we received that documentation and stuff, we kind of put that on hold. We moved that equipment out of our property, and We moved it out of sight, and that's pretty much all you can see in those photos. You can also take note in the photos that you see excessive vegetation. So somebody's probably crawling through the weeds to get those photos. They're pretty excessive. And I also,
In fact, I was advised that the enforcement officer did walk the property line. He did not, when he took the photo of the garage, he had to actually go onto the property some distance before he could get that picture.
and one more point I want to make, all of our business ventures take place off of the property. We don't have any websites that list our residence as a business. All of our business takes place in Hamilton or at our post office box. So there's no traffic that's going to be coming to our house that's unnecessary. There's no unnecessary business traffic that's going to be there. There's not going to be customers showing up on our door. It's basically like our attorney said. It's focused for residents, and that's what we use it for mostly. And then other than just storing some personal equipment.
And do employees meet off-site?
Employees meet on the jobs typically. Yeah, we do a lot of work out of town, so our workers will meet us at a hotel. They'll meet us at a job site. We do a lot of traveling, so you don't typically see employees at our residence.
I just wanted to say that when you seen that property the first time it come in, like I told you, I was working for Joe and Dottie Grooms, and I worked it out. I didn't borrow money to build that house. I worked daily till I got enough money to build the house. That's the reason it stayed under where it looked for a long time, because I didn't want to go borrow money and put myself in debt. And I think that's, it's what most people should be doing. Instead of borrowing, it's going out working and spending as you make it. And most of that equipment right now sitting in Detroit, Pittsburgh. We do a lot of work out of town for AutoZone. We work in Chicago, West Virginia. We're working in West Virginia right now. That's where the equipment is. It's fairly there. Anybody that comes over is invading our privacy when they coming over shooting pictures through the woods. I could be standing there with no clothes on them out there shooting pictures. I mean, that's invading my private privacy. So I don't see why anybody would do that without that they sort of knows their neighbors. It's the only thing I can say.
I've known Mr. Street for years, and he is a very upstanding gentleman. He tries to be a good neighbor. As he said, he has spent considerable amount of his assets improving his home, the appearance of his home, for the benefit of his neighbors. All he's asking is that he be allowed to continue using the garage to store equipment, and the trucks be parked next to the garage in that area you see up in the upper right-hand corner. And that's what he's been doing, and that's below street level. Even the roof of that garage is, you can't see it from street level. He's a good neighbor, and he intends to continue being a good neighbor, and he makes his livelihood in blacktopping and road construction, and he needs to be able to store these vehicles for the safety of his equipment, because you store vehicles off-site at some other location, and under the current situation, people are just going to tear that equipment apart to steal whatever they can off of it. This is the most secure position for his business, to be able to watch his own equipment in his garage. He doesn't intend to expand it any further than what he's doing, and he doesn't intend to be a nuisance to his neighbors. And the appearance of his home from the outside is consistent with the neighborhood. And we're asking this body to give us a variance, a non-conforming use variance, so that he can continue as he has done for over 35 years already.
Okay. Thank you.
I just want to point out one more geographical advantage we have with storing this equipment in this position. Directly north of us is a forest preserve, so there's not a likelihood of any neighbor moving in there and being bothered by our activity. And the whole area that's visible by neighbors would be completely secluded by the hill and by vegetation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have,
I'll call for some additional people. So, do we have anyone else speaking in favor of this?
Cheryl?
If you give your name.
State your name for the record.
My name is Danny Terrell. I'm a relative of the streets. I've been knowing them since 1985, council. But I want to point out to what the lawyer said here. You can't see any kind of equipment that contain to construction from the road. Only way you can see it, you have to be in a helicopter or airplane. It doesn't bother anyone. Very beautiful property. Me as a little kid, I've been there. I was there when Dottie sold him the property. And he told him, you can put anything you want here. And we were building. Then he was also teaching me something. But to make the main point is, if you drove by there tonight and seen it, it's beautiful. I think we got the best house on the road. And you can't see any equipment. I just wanted to point that out to the council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else speaking in favor? Please come and address the podium. Name and address for the record, please.
Matt Cordy, Ross, Ohio, 3626 Longhorn Drive. I've known Glenn since I've been married, about 35 years now. And I don't know if this is appropriate right here, Ron, to say this, but he's a Christian. That man give you the shirt off his back and everything else. I've been working with him, well, I've known him and worked with him probably for 25 years now. And we go out of town a lot for AutoZones, and all it is a storage space. Places you rent or something somewhere off the road. People steal, break windows and all that. So that's all it is. It's not no big deal. 3 or 4 houses down the other side of the street, you got Guts Weiler parks his dump truck right in the front of the house. And then there's a guy right next door to him, he's got tractors and everything else. So I just like to see do some lenience to our company. There's about 9 families involved in all this. All right, thanks.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else speaking in favor? Please come address the podium, please.
This is Mr. Darrell Markham.
I'm from Hamilton, Ohio. I've known Mr. Street since 1985. I worked with him, well, I guess about a third of that time. I personally worked for him. I've done a lot of work on his house for him. Matter of fact, all the improvements you see in the photos, all the siding, the porch columns, all the porches. And all the time that I've been there since, in and out since '85, the only time you ever see any dust or anything like that even happening there, or any kind of noise, is if he comes in with a load. He'll occasionally bring in stuff for his fill to get his road back to where his garage is, because his garage is 500 feet from the road. We've already measured it. It's 500 feet back. And when he first put this in, the hillside was like so steep, you couldn't even hardly drive down to that thing. But that's where they wanted it. So he occasionally brings in, if he gets extra fill, and they'll bring it in and drop it off. That's what you see in that photo, where it kind of looks like a solid part of rock, I guess it would be the best way to call it. But other than that, there'll be occasional guy down at the garage, maybe changing a tire or just maintenance, and you don't hear it. They're that far away, you don't even hear it. And there's never a crowd of people. There's never a bunch of traffic. And as far as Glenn goes, he keeps his property in immaculate condition. he tells me when I get ready to do something, he'll say, Darryl, when I send you out, don't buy nothing really cheap. I don't want to have to do it again. Do me a good job and make sure I get some decent stuff. And he doesn't care to, pay the extra to get it because he likes to have things the way they should be. And one other thing I'd like to mention. He's a very spiritual man. And I feel like this is a very unfair burden for an 80-year-old man to have to go through after as hard as he's worked on this place. That's all I gotta say.
Thank you. Anyone else speaking in favor of this appeal?
That's it.
Hey, it's his birthday.
Anyone else speaking in favor?
Craig?
As-
I'm sorry. Mr. Craig Stevens?
Sir, did you sign in the sheet?
No, I did not, sir.
And did I swear you in?
Yes, I did.
Okay. You sign in, please. Thanks, sir. State your name and address for the record, please.
Craig Stevens, 7559 Brookville Road. So, I was his son-in-law for years, but I've known the man for 35 years. And I've been on and off this property for 35 years. And this property is, when we got there was nothing there. There's very few houses. There was nothing around. It was all wooded areas. It was farmland. It was whatever. He developed his property, and he's done a really good job. And I just want to reiterate that I think it's unfair that this is even taking place. I almost bought the lot that these pictures were taken from, that you received, but I didn't buy it. But yeah, I just think that it's horrible that this is happening to him. He's like my dad. He is my dad. So he's almost 80 years old. He shouldn't be going through this. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else speaking in favor?
Today's his birthday. I signed the paper.
Okay.
And,
If you come to the podium, please,
he
then.
ain't hurt nobody.
Just come to the podium, sir.
Thank you. And you have to state your name, if you will.
Name and address.
Street, I'm his brother,
Okay, thanks, sir.
and he ain't hurt nobody.
Your
You
address?
Can't see nothing from a road or nothing.
Okay, you're
He's a
on.
good man.
State your address.
State your address, please.
My address?
Yes, sir.
2240 West Elton Road.
And you did sign in, sir?
Do what?
You did sign in?
Yeah, mm-hmm.
22.
It's not on that paper, you can sign it again.
Yeah, I'm filling in for him. Just state your address again, I'm just getting it on the record.
2240
Thank you, sir.
West Elton Road, Hamilton, Ohio.
Thank you very much.
How old are you today?
There's Mike Street, right?
He is a good man. He is the type of person that would give you the shirt off his back, literally. He takes his religious convictions seriously. He sings gospel, he records gospel, and he helps everyone that he can help. And he will definitely do whatever it takes if there's an issue, such as he was going to blacktop his own driveway and had a piece of blacktopping equipment up there. But when the citation came, he removed that because he doesn't want to be a bad neighbor. He wants to be a good neighbor, and he wants to conform to the neighborhood, and he wants his home to conform to the neighborhood. But we don't think the use that he's had for 35 years does not conform presently to the neighborhood, and it does not disrupt the neighborhood in any fashion. So we're asking this body to grant a non-conforming use certificate. If this body needs any additional information and wishes to table it, we can provide whatever additional information that may be needed. We'd be willing to do that. He's built this business. He's basically built this business by pulling himself up by his own bootstraps. He's a sharecropper from the South, that I understand. came up here,
And sir, we're getting outside the relevance of this
Right.
case, so if we could,
But
if
I
we keep
mean,
to the facts, and
I'm just trying to.
we're kind of chasing around, and we still have other people to listen to tonight.
Yes, I understand, but I just want to point out that this is a business that he's built through his own sweat and efforts.
And that's been established, and it's, you have anything, anybody else have anything to say in favor? Okay, so anyone speaking,
Say one more thing.
come to the podium, sir.
This has been being operated for right around 35 years. And this is the first thing that's ever been brought up about it. So I think if we were some kind of a nuisance or a bother, it would have been brought up long before now, other than it's over one nosy neighbor.
Thank you, sir. Last time, anyone speaking in favor?
That's it.
Okay, I see none. Anyone speaking in opposition? Please come forward, sir. And at this point, you're not cross-examining, sir. If you please be seated. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mike St. Clair. I live at 11840 Stone Mill Road.
Thank you.
The gentleman, Mr. Street, very good man, I agree with that. But Glenn knows it's been residential zoning since we've moved in. I told him when he moved in, we were friends, and I said, hey, this is residential zoning, you can't park your equipment here. He didn't apply, so back in 1995, I approached the zoning board of Colerain Township and talked to a gentleman named Jerry Quinn. Jerry Quinn asked me what the neighbor's name was, and I said, his name is Glenn Street. He says, I know Glenn Street, I dealt with him before. I said, fine. So he approached Glenn, and Glenn did comply to Jerry's request to move his equipment. He did move his equipment for approximately 3 years off of that property. Now, currently, there's 3 dump trucks, bobcats, heavy equipment, pavers, starting in the morning, 6:30 at 7 o'clock. These things are loud. I wear earplugs to bed now. Backup alarms, beep, 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 are echoing up through that hollow. Now tell me, it's almost every day. It's not true, they don't park there. That's not true. Currently, this is the problem. It's wearing on me mentally and physically. I'm just tired of it. I can't even open my windows. It's not an option. Now, he dumps material back in the back of his property. Does he have a permit? I don't know. Is the material contaminated? I don't know. Maybe the EPA knows. I don't know. These questions need to be answered. This is a single-family residence. As you can see, there's 10, 15 cars parked there constantly. People going up and drive his driveway all day long. He does have a beautiful house. I agree with that. The trees, if you want to see on his right side, or the south side of his property, are 20 pine trees I installed because I didn't want to look at that eyesore anymore. That's all I got to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else speaking in opposition?
Hello, I'm Joe Erdman, 11834 Stone Mill Road. I'd like to review a couple things Glenn said. First off, number one, we moved in 1988. We built, we're on the private drive. If you look below, well, we're on the private drive to the right of the subdivision. He did put the road in for that. We moved in 88. His land was still vacant. So he hasn't been doing that for 35 years. We've been in there for 31 years. My biggest concern, first off, because they have equipment, there is traffic going in and out. The other concern is the value of the properties. If this is single family, it's gonna be rated single family. Someone comes to buy my property, they find out he has the equipment there, they say, well, do I wanna live next to something like that or do I not? So that could actually affect my property. That's my biggest concern. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else speaking against? Please come forward, ma'am. State your name and address for the record, please.
Susan Erdman, 11834 Stone Mill. Excuse me, I'm Joe's wife. And like he said, we built our home in 1988 and moved in there, or 1987. We moved in 1988. And we feel like it's going to bring down our property values when we're getting close to retirement. And if we want to sell our property, it's not supposed to be a business there. We're in a residential area. And I understand he needs to keep his equipment somewhere. And I think he should. I think he should rent somewhere in a commercial area to store his equipment like all other owners of property have to do. So that's my feeling. It's residential, and I don't want it to bring down our property value. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else speaking in opposition? I see none speaking in opposition. Do I have a motion to close the public portion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second have been made. Please roll call vote.
Mr. Bertolt?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Reinger?
Aye.
Mr. Shutt? Aye. Mr. Roberto?
Yes. All right, we'll start with Mr. Reininger. Any questions for the?
Yes, I'm not sure if Mr. Bartlett would want to come to the podium. I have comments as well as questions. You can speak for, I'm assuming you're speaking for your client?
Yes.
Well, not everybody has to come up. First of all, this is not an inquiry about anyone's integrity, period. What I do remember from our presentation is we are in a residential district. Is it AA or R2? Is that it? This is
R2.
This is not an agricultural district or a commercial district at all. It's residential. I think that I made note of that. The second thing I made note of is there's no question that this is a business. It operates in other places, but this is a base for a business. And in a residential district, regardless of its geography, and visibility was talked about a lot, and that's a factor, but it still is a residential district. Businesses are not supported in a district that is considered single-family residential. Now, you addressed 13.7.3 as a caveat that allows things to have an occupational business. But if you read 13.7.3, it says, no truck, construction equipment, commercial trailer, or other vehicle of business or industrial nature shall be parked in a residential lot except, and it says 1-ton pickup trucks, but it also says no tow trucks, stake bodies, dump trucks may be parked on a residential lot. I'm dealing with a residential lot, and the other thing I'm concerned about is we're setting a precedent. This residential lot has a geography that it obviously shields some visibility, but it's still a residential lot. I can't find any way to weasel around the fact that you're in a home development. On the plus side, you had 35 years of occupation of a business in a residential development that shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Well, other than there are other businesses, as he indicated.
We're talking
there's
about
another-
this business. I'd rather keep the focus on this business.
Right.
And I can't address anybody else's. So on the plus side, 35 years of being in a place where you shouldn't have been in the first place, I think is pretty decent. But and there's no question about integrity, not at all. I just can't see the establishment of a precedent that puts businesses in a residential zone. I mean, I just can't figure a way around that. I don't have any questions other than a protracted comment.
I can research that. if the board wishes to table this for.
We're not at that point right now. He's posing questions and he hasn't posed that question. So let's not even bring it up.
So you know my position, it's a business operating in a residential environment that shouldn't be there. The fact that it's been there for 35 years is commendable, and the fact that you can't see it from the road is a factor, but it's still out of compliance, and I don't see
Well, that's
any.
why we're asking for a non-conforming use.
Yeah, that's right. And that, so you know, where I'm going is a residential district does not support businesses. And I'm pretty much.
But this residential district does support businesses, and we're asking that we be granted the same courtesy that the other businesses have up the street of having a non-conforming use. This is, I believe he stated, was rural residential, which isn't the same as a subdivision, you know, closer into Colerain Township. We're in a rural environment where people are used to running their businesses out of their properties, and they are running their businesses out of their properties up and down the street. We sent out 2 pages of notices to neighbors, and of those 2 pages of people that we listed to be noticed, we've only got 2 neighbors that showed up. The one that complained initially and apparently has been disturbed about his having these business equipment for the last 20-some years and has not done anything in regards to that until recently. And the other is a property owner who claims that it's going to affect their property values, but with the other non-conforming uses up and down the street, that obviously isn't a factor, because anyone coming to view their property is going to see these other dump trucks parked within plain view of the street. They're not going to see my client's dump trucks parked within view of the street. So we believe, and I understand your concerns, seriously. But we're asking that an exception be given in this circumstance, that he be granted a non-conforming use because of the history he's had using this property to store his construction equipment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
We'll continue. Mr. Shep?
I don't have anything.
Mr. Hill?
I did have a couple questions. You mentioned several times that the township requested for the property owner to install the garage. Do you have any documentation of that that was something that the township?
How did that occur?
I think his name was Quinn. He came out. He told me if I wanted to park anything 100 foot from the right of way on the road, it was legal then. So what happened is y'all keep zoning, changing the zoning, and we was already in there. He said if I build me a place and store it back there in the back, I could put what I wanted to down there. I think his name was Quinn, was the inspector, so I done it. So I did not tell that guy to put for residential use on it. All I heard was an architect. He came out and said that building will meet local, federal, and state codes way that building is built. So what happened is, I don't know who put that on there. I did not sign off on that. And when was that changed from agriculture to commercial to residential? What year did y'all change your zoning? Do you know?
Marty.
Did y'all do it
Answer
before
that.
'84?
1962.
He told me it was a commercial property. I mean, it was agriculture when I done it for Joe.
If it were agricultural, it would have been for property tax purposes, not for zoning
Well,
purposes.
what it is, that property was a farm, and they cut it up. I was there with the engineer and helped him as he surveyed it out so he could turn it into residential use. And these people back here knew I was there before they bought the property. The same thing as Rack built out there on North Bend Road. He had his stuff there, and people moved in around it, and they told him he had to go. I mean, if y'all got a right to pick losers and winners, I'm as good as somebody else. You keep giving Rumpke permits to keep adding on to that dump down there. When I walk out of my house, it stinks. Then you give Joseph Chevrolet permit. You give these AT&T permit. But when it comes to me or somebody like that, you gotta say, hey, you a winner, loser. I'm picking winners and losers here. You guys not got the right to pick winners and losers. I've got as much right as anybody. I served my time in the military and probably helped save your life.
Sir, that's nothing of that is in question.
No, it ain't. But what I'm trying to tell you is,
all we're asking,
I'll be 80
stop, pause.
I'll be 80 year
Pause,
old.
pause for a
I'll
second.
be 80 year old next in a couple of years.
This board is charged with following the zoning laws. It has nothing to
The
do with.
zoning was changed later I was there.
What we have to deal with is what we have currently today.
I understand it, sir.
So
But-
that's all we're talking about today. We're not talking about things in the past. We have to address what the zoning law.
That's what I'm trying to tell you. It was commercial. I mean, it was agriculture when I come in there. Because Joe told me it was. Joe Watzenbach specifically told me, park it right there. I was there. These people wasn't nowhere around. They come in there. Nobody did make them buy there. Nobody did make me buy an extra rumpke dump. Okay, so 10 years from now, all of us probably be dead. This don't make no difference no how. So what happened is, I need to have the right to be left alone.
So my second question is regarding the grading of the property. There looks like there's been substantial grading of the property. Was that any of that gone through Hamilton County? Did you get any permits to do any of that grading that has been done on your property?
Sir?
The question is, there's been some substantial grading done on the property. Has there been any permitting acquired through Hamilton County?
In the state of Ohio, local, federal, if you got solid fill, you can dump it in a landfill. They've come out and checked that landfill out. EPA and everybody's been out there. We do not dump garbage on there. What we done is solid fill. We don't go out there and bring garbage in there. What we dump there is from residents around here. Like out of your driveway, is your driveway contaminated? Is your yard contaminated?
The question was, did you get a permit, sir?
To fill?
Yes, sir.
We didn't have a permit to fill because we didn't need one.
And no permitting for grading?
We didn't do nothing but grade our yard.
Right, did you get it,
Yeah,
did the
we just
county
filled it
verify that your grading did not negatively affect any
We
of
don't
your
have to have
surrounding
a
neighbors?
permit in Colerain Township to put a driveway in.
Okay.
I've never pulled a permit in Colerain Township to put a driveway in.
Anything else, Mr. Hill?
No further questions.
Mr. Brattle?
Obviously, my client is upset. He's had this business for a long time.
And at this point, it's for questions, and there's no need for you to interject at this point. Mr. Brattle? you have a
Well, I
question?
was going to ask the same question about proof that Colerain Township allowed the development to occur, because that was brought up several times. We've already gone through that. And it does, I mean, it is, as one of the neighbors said, many businesses do have, property off-site, whether it's an acre or whatever, in a fenced-in area where equipment could be stored. I'm assuming that is an option, right, if need be?
Well, it would be off-site, and he wouldn't be able to,
But many businesses have that same,
and many of them get their vehicles damaged and
well,
property stolen.
that's subjective, but, I mean, give me the facts on that, if you're saying that.
Well, I wouldn't know how many businesses store their business equipment off-site from their residences, but I know.
Well, probably most do, because they're not allowed to have them on their residential property, but.
But we see it all the time. We see that.
Well, and again, if there's other people on Stone Mill, that doesn't mean that they're there legally. I mean, they might also need to submit for a non-conforming.
That's why we're asking for a non-conforming use permit.
Yeah, right. All right, that's all.
Thank you.
All right, so I had a question on, I mean, we've already talked about the elevation change, because in Hamilton County, anything over 6 feet, you have to have a permit. So that's one fact. Secondly, what kind of vehicles are truly being stored on the property? I'm hearing dump trucks and graders, and what vehicles are being on there on a daily basis, so that we have a clear picture.
What vehicles are there on a daily basis?
what happens is we can move anything we need off of the property. We've got a Bobcat there right now, which Quinn told me that I could keep there. He said I had a right to use a Bobcat if I wanted it. He's the one who told me to build a garage down bottom of the hill and put stuff in. I was gonna tell him. I got what have I got on there now?
What would you typically have on the property?
Probably I got a paving machine sitting in the garage. It's out of sight and out of mind, and a couple of rollers inside of it. The trucks is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
How many trucks do you
I got 3 dump trucks.
have? And how many are typically on the property?
When they're not
In
being
the
used,
wintertime,
when they're not being
we park
used.
them both down we park it down there in the wintertime behind the garage next to the park. There's wood, it's at a curtain, the trees is surrounded, it's got like a curtain surrounded by trees all the way around the building.
Okay.
And the Bobcat?
The Bobcats were put inside the garage.
So we have a Bobcat, we have a paving machine, we have some rollers, and we have 3 dump trucks. Is that fair?
Sir?
So we have a Bobcat, some paving machines, or a paving machine, some rollers.
2 rollers.
And 3 dump trucks.
Yeah.
And that's what's typically
Yeah.
there when you're not using them.
Yeah, in the wintertime mostly.
Okay.
We're working right now, we got a job in Pittsburgh, and we're also working up in Bridgeport, West Virginia right now with equipment. It's not at the property.
Have you investigated any facilities that could house this equipment off-site?
Do what, sir?
Have you investigated any other facilities that you could potentially house this equipment off-site? Like,
Investigated off-site
storage?
locations for your equipment?
We had it set up downtown, and we had a Bobcat was stole from us, had a trailer stole. And when we started, I was building on my house. Like I said, I was working in a building on it, and I wasn't living there. So they come in there and stole my cabinets out of the house. They cleaned us out. And I talked to the police. They said, I might as well just move over there because they were stealing us blind. And if you park your equipment out on the road somewhere, if you ain't got it watched, they will.
Do you have property to park your equipment on away from your residence?
No. I got a piece of property in Hamilton, Ohio. I got a studio up there where it's commercial. We play music in there, and we do recording gospel and country and western and blues and jazz. So we don't put machinery on that.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions. We have anyone who would like to make a motion?
Calling for a motion, I'll move to deny the request for appeal.
Okay, a motion has been made. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second has been made. Roll call vote, please. Any discussion?
So a yes is for denial?
We are denying yes, that's correct. All right, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Ranger?
Aye.
Mr. Shep?
Aye.
Mr. Bartold?
Yes.
Mr. Roberto?
Aye. Your appeal has been denied. All right, last one.
2 more.
He wants to apply for a landfill permit.
The agenda.
Go to OSHA, and he's gonna need equipment down there.
You need this?
Yeah, thank you very much. All right, so next on the docket would be BZA 2019-008. This is a request for variance for section 9.3.6 for yard setbacks for construction of new single-family home. Location of the property is at 7270 Southwind Terrace. The applicant and owner is Red Rock Investment and Tommy, I'm going to butcher this name, Vasilou. Does the staff have a presentation?
Yes, we do. This particular property is in the Austin Ridge subdivision. That's a planned district. It contains both single-family detached lots and also landominiums, and this is in the landominium portion of that development. Most of this development was done in the late 1990s, early 2000s. When the housing market turned, there were still some lots that were vacant. A few of them have filled in, but there's, I think, about 4 or 5 vacant lots remaining in this subdivision, and this is one of them. This particular one is on Southwind Terrace. Southwind Terrace is a private drive. The streets in this particular section are owned by the Land Dominium Association. This particular property is a corner lot of 2 private streets. The applicant is proposing to build a house that's very similar, it's almost identical to the one next door with some modifications, but the houses in this subdivision are very similar. Being a planned development, the side yard, front, rear, and side yard setbacks are set by the development plan. Side yard setbacks are only required to be 5 feet in this particular zone classification or this development. For some reason, which would mean that you have to have at least 10 feet between houses. This developed, like I say, late 1990s, 2000s. Some of the houses do not meet that 10-foot separation. I have no documentation as to how that happened, and unfortunately, we no longer have the plot plans for those houses on file. This particular house, as proposed, has a bay window that extends on one side that goes into the side yard setback, has a covered porch that goes into the rear yard setback, and a portion of the sidewall facing Jacob's Way, which is the private street to the left of this house. The applicant has submitted floor plans with this. We have elevation drawings also. The key is, and I have it in your packet, this drawing on the left shows the highlighted area. Those are the areas that are the intrusions into that side yard, front yard setback. If you actually look at the average of the side wall, probably would meet the setback because of the angle of the streets, the angles of the property lines. There are some intrusions. Get to the findings on this, sorry. The findings are the property in question would likely yield a reasonable return without the variance. They could build a smaller house on this and still meet code. The variance requested is not substantial since the allowances are only for a few feet into the setback requirements. Probably the average would meet the setback requirement. It's just the way the extensions occur. The granting of the variance would grant a consideration that's not available to the property owners in the neighborhood. However, there are only a few empty lots left within the Austin Ridge subdivision. Fourth, the granting of the variance would probably not have a negative impact on the neighboring property and would create a precedent for other variances if requested by neighboring properties. Approval of the variances would not affect the delivery of government services. There's no topographic issues related to the property which would constrain reasonable application of the regulations without additional expense. And by taking into consideration the benefit to the applicant, if the variance is granted, is weighed against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of neighborhood and broader community, staff finds that substantial justice would be done by granting the variance. Staff's recommendation is for approval of the variance. One thing I sort of alluded to but didn't actually show, well, it doesn't actually show in the aerial. The house adjacent to the right is at an angle, so there's no place where there is less than a 10-foot separation between this house and the adjacent house. That's a consideration. Are there any questions regarding the recommendation
Question?
or circumstances?
I see none. Is the applicant present? You did not sign in. Please do. And this would be, is this
They're all the
Southland
same,
Terrace?
right? Are they different? Oh, they are.
And you've been sworn in as well?
Yeah.
And he's gonna be short and sweet.
I think so. Thank you very much.
So I'm with Red Rock Investments. It's my wife's company. I work for her. She is. We would like to purchase this property, and how we got involved with this is my realtor's cousin. My realtor is Tom Johansson, and his cousin was the HOA president a couple cycles ago for this HOA, and we were talking at a family party one time about how he would like to see the rest of the properties developed in the neighborhood. There's only, as Marty mentioned, 4, and I think there's actually 5 one on a different street that's available. How he'd like to see him get finished, I guess Decker, who had started this project, as he mentioned, it never got finished once the economy kind of went downhill. And they've had these empty lots that they've had sitting for quite a while. This one was the only one that's on the market. So Tommy Vasilou, who is the current owner, we entered into a real estate contract with him to purchase it, with the exception that if we couldn't get a zoning approval for the current plans that he had drawn for the property, then that we probably wouldn't move forward because of the big cost of having the plans redone. So. And that's kind of where we left it. So that's when we filed for the appeal, and so here we are.
Okay, thank you. Sure. Anyone else speaking in favor? See none. Anyone speaking in opposition? I see none. We have a motion to close the public input.
So moved.
Second. All right, motion and second been made. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Bartold?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Reinger?
Aye.
Mr. Shup?
Aye.
Mr. Roberto?
Yes. We'll start off with Mr. Hill this time.
No questions.
Mr. Bartle?
No questions.
Mr. Reininger?
No questions, sir?
Mr. Shup?
None.
I don't have any questions either.
I was all prepared to.
Oh, well, okay, I'll ask a question for you. That's,
We
so,
can stay
so
till
you have a
11.
contingency to buy the property based upon today's outcome?
More or less, yeah.
Perfect.
And we would like to actually buy the other properties also and build on those as well. But we understand those are a little small, have a little smaller footprint, so we might have to work with an architect to get another plan, drawn. But the HOA has already approved this plan, and they're excited about, the potential of getting this thing finished out.
It's a unique space for sure. I mean, it's like a little diamond in the middle of that.
Really? Yeah, I mean, it is, so.
All right, well, very good. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, great.
I'll make a motion to approve the variance.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion second has been made. Do we have any questions?
Was Mr. Shup on the second?
Yes, he was.
Yes.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Shup?
Aye.
Oops, I had Ms. Wilson. Mr. Reinger?
Aye.
Mr. Roberto?
I'll be last. So.
Yeah. Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Bartold?
Yes.
Mr. Reinger?
No, we're Mr. Roberto, but yes.
Oh, yes, sorry.
It's all right. It's been a long night already. All right, it's been approved. Good luck to you. All right, that brings us to the last one for the night, correct? So BZA 2019-9 or -009, request for variance from section 12.8.1 for a proposal 6-foot privacy fence exceeding the 25% of sidewall length requirement. The location of the property is at 8230 Royal Heights Drive. The applicant owner is Stacy Monahan. And does the staff have a presentation?
Yes, we do. This particular property is located at the very southern end of Royal Heights Drive in a cul-de-sac. The end of that cul-de-sac has a public walkway that extends down to Galbraith Road. It's a 10-foot wide easement with a concrete, or not easement, it's actually a right-of-way with a public sidewalk. This is directly adjacent to it. This shows the location of that sidewalk. The fence requirements say that you can have privacy fences in the backyard, and those can encroach into the side yard up to 25% of the wall length of the house. And every time we do privacy fences, we go through this calculation with the neighbor and figure out, okay, how far can we go? This particular request is to take it all the way to the front corner of the house. And this is, let me see if I can zoom that a little. This shows the variance request. What would be allowable is where the kind of darker line, dash line is. What is being requested is where the yellow dash line would be. They could put a fence up to 4 feet in height, a picket style, open style, where that dash line is, but the preference is to go with privacy. The justification for the privacy is it is a public walkway, so they really lose some of the privacy that you would normally have in a side yard, which only impacts, say, a next-door neighbor type situation. We did have a similar situation with Northgate Mall about a year or so ago. Another public sidewalk. That was different because it was actually a public right-of-way that stubbed into Northgate Mall, and that was a front yard fence. This one's considered a side yard. And actually, I got to correct some errors in our staff report because we say it's a front yard. This is a photograph showing that. It kind of looks like a little tunnel of vegetation. The house on the left is the applicant, but that extends all the way through to Galbraith. Why isn't that going? Oh, this is just an illustration about what that privacy fence would look like from the street, that sort of orangish square that's been inserted. This is the walkway from the back of the property. The applicant is on the right. We'll note that that's a 10-foot wide right-of-way, and the fences are less than 10 feet apart. If this is approved, we would suggest that that has to be at least 5 feet off the center line of the walkway setback. And this is looking down towards Galbraith Road. There is a privacy fence, but that is a rear yard privacy fence. Another view of the property, and I can't read my own notes on there. Oh, yeah, this is the new wood privacy fence. This was included with the application. Staff findings, the fence height variance requested is substantial since the zoning regulations prohibit privacy fences. And again, I put, well, this was Jesse's, but put front yard. Actually, we're dealing with a side yard issue of the principal building. Granting of the variance would grant a consideration that's not available to other property owners in the neighborhood. The property in question would likely yield a reasonable return without a variance. By the way, back on number 2, if this variance is granted and if other adjacent property owners to this walkway ask for the same consideration, we would probably make whatever recommendation by setting precedent with this. Number 4, the granting of the variance would probably not have a negative impact on the neighboring property, but would create a precedent to allow for privacy fences in side yards, if requested by similar properties. Number 5, approval of fence variance would not allow for would not affect the delivery of governmental services. Number 6, there's no unusual topographic or site configuration issues related to the property, which would prevent the reasonable application of the front yard regulations. Again, side yard. Expressed nature of the hardship is based on the adverse relation between the neighbors and not a physical attribute to the property. By taking into consideration the benefit to the applicant, the variance is granted is weighed against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood and broader community. Staff finds that substantial justice would, there again, another error, would be done by granting the variance for the front for the side yard privacy fence. I will note that we ran this by the police chief to see if they had any security issues, and they're actually in favor of granting this variance.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Is the applicant present? Come on up. State your name and address for the record, please, and did you sign in?
I did.
Thank you, ma'am.
Stacy Monahan, 8231 High Street.
Thank you.
Okay, the reason we would like the privacy fence is there's several of them. People use the walkway at all hours of the day and night. At 2:16 in the morning, we have side cameras, and we can hear them, so it disturbs our sleep at night. We did also have 2 dogs, and they like to run in the backyard. It's completely fenced in with a 48-inch chain link fence now.
Sure.
But with people walking up down there, we worry about what if something could happen to the dogs. We have a pool in the backyard, which we have a permit for. But we worry about somebody jumping over. We've already had rocks thrown in the pool. And Election Day, November 2016, our house was broken into by somebody who jumped the fence. They tried to break in through the basement window. Luckily, our alarm system stopped them. The motion detector in the basement went off. The fence would have a gate at the front of the house, so there would still be access. On the other side of the house, we're going to keep the 48-inch chain link fence across the front. So there's still access that way for public utilities or whatever. And if we was to only stick to the 25% variance, then that would leave our air conditioner completely exposed to a public walkway. And we know how people like to rip those off. So I'm asking you guys to grant this for safety, for our yard, and just our privacy and peace of mind.
Thank you. Anyone else speaking in favor? I see you signed in. Do you want to speak?
I didn't swear in. That was okay. I didn't.
Would you like to be sworn in? Do you swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth before the Board of Zoning Appeals? Say I do.
I do.
All right. Please come in forward, state your name and address.
My name is Nick Monahan. I'm at 8230 Wellhurst Drive. Stacy's my wife. I mean, I concur in anything she says. I mean, we've had many problems. We've had the news out here twice about that property, that walkway. We tried to get it shut down due to other trustees. For other reasons, they said no. We don't know why. But it is, I do agree though, it impedes on our safety and our privacy. And it really is, I don't think it's any danger. We're not blocking the whole area off. It's just that area. It is a public walkway. It doesn't need any neighbors. And even the neighbors, if you look, the other two is foliage overgrown. You can't even see past our house anyway. But I'm not really worried about the neighbors. I'm worried about it being a public walkway. And anybody, even though people use it for good, the ones I worry about are for bad. And you got police records of people down there. We've had kids get jumped down there. And, like I said, it's true. We have 2 dogs, and, I've got $2,000 worth of dogs, and they are registered too. So, you know what I'm saying? I don't want somebody throwing rat poison because they're mad because they bark at them or whatever. I want to keep it out of sight, out of mind. I'm finding stuff in my pool. I don't want to get in there. I have some kids in there, like, we're playing, all of a sudden there's glass broken in there, and, I'm in trouble because it's just, I think it's not really that much of a nuisance for anybody for us to have that. I understand that if we get it, other people may try to, but this is a different sort of circumstance. I'm not trying to cover up anything. I'm trying to protect myself and my family. So that's all I can say.
Thank you very much, sir. Anyone else speaking in favor? I see none. Anyone speaking in opposition? I see none. May I have a motion to close the public portion?
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, motion and second been made. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Berthold?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Ranger?
Aye.
Mr. Shuck?
Aye.
Mr. Roberto?
Yes. All right, we'll start off with Mr. Reininger for questions.
One of you would please come to the podium. Appreciate that. What type of fence? Is this wood, vinyl? What type of fence?
It's really wood fence. A wood fence.
Wood fence.
Just a normal dog-eared,
Sure.
6-foot privacy fence with a probably 48-inch gate in the front.
Yeah.
In case we need to get the mower in and out.
Anticipating that there's a lot of traffic and the wood fence, graffiti, is that a concern, and how would it be addressed? Because I can see where it would be an interesting target to paint.
Yeah, it would be, and it would bother me if somebody did that. We plan on staining it, finishing it.
Sure.
But in all honesty, I'm more concerned about my safety on the inside of my fence.
Okay.
And if somebody wanted to spray something on there, I can re-stain it. I mean, yeah, we'd probably report it just to have the documentation of the traffic, of the trouble that happens on that walkway. But I'd re-stain it. I'm more concerned about having a little sanctuary inside my yard instead of sitting out there worrying about, oh, who's walking down here? What are they gonna throw at me? Are they gonna throw at my dogs? Are they gonna try to break my house again?
Okay.
So that's more my concern.
Okay, thank you.
And you raised your hand to answer the question too, sir?
Yes, I was gonna say,
Come to the podium and speak. Thank you.
in supporting the question you're asking, proposing, if you showed that one picture in front of our house, when it looks down the walkway. So we've been at this house for over 10 years. And in the red fence that says behind another dwelling, if you look, it's old, but nobody's vandalized it. So there's also proof right there. I mean, they made it keep to themselves. It's just, like I said, outside of the mind. We're vandalized, especially it being that open. Someone's gonna catch them, they're gonna get ran if they're caught, whatever. But I mean, proof right there is that you can look at that picture, actually the one, it shows like you're actually walking, you see that one red fence.
Let's see, did I have?
Like I said, it looks old, but you can tell that nobody's actually vandalized it or, graffitied it or anything. See, it's just old. And that's been there for, you can tell, for years and years. So, I mean, I think the vandalism of like doing that could be minimal, especially with a lot of people out there. As I'm saying, it's a traffic walkway. People can be 9 out of the line. Like I get to, we have cameras. We have cameras all over the house. So, I mean, I understand too that our safety's on the inside. I mean, if it happens, it happens. I mean, even if I put up a fence and they need a variance and put it up to where 25% gets vandalized, I still got to report it, call the cops, and do whatever.
Sure.
So it's no different if it comes up to the front.
Okay, thank you. Just stay in the front seat because you're going to be called back up, or you can just stay there if you like. Just stay close because we have probably a couple more questions. Mr. Shupp?
No, I've been.
Mr. Hill?
You answered my question that I had, was about how long have you resided in the property, but I think just to answer your, I don't know if it was a question, but I believe that this was put in for pedestrian connectivity. That's typically what, what townships and cities, everybody's moving towards connectivity, being able to walk places and things like that. So I'm not sure that, the township would be willing to close that at any point, but.
I've tried everything I can with the fees and everything, and it doesn't look like it. But the good thing with our privacy fence is it still gives everybody access to the walkway and gives us our security that we need.
Yeah, I don't have any issues with what you're requesting.
Mr. Burtle?
Oh, I don't think so, other than, I'm assuming the sidewalk was put in the 50s when the subdivision.
Because there used to be, if you research down at the end of that walkway, there used to be a Metro bus route.
Yeah, and that's why it was put in. Yeah.
And it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the people using it are people from the neighborhood, or?
Some are.
I guess you don't know.
Some are really good people that use it from the neighborhood, and some are not so good. We've watched numerous drug deals go down. I actually had Greg Insko telling me to quit confronting the drug dealers on the sidewalk. So I did. But some people really honestly do use it for good, and I don't get that. But in all honesty, I see more bad down there than I do good.
Yeah.
And for over the last year, that's actually been the cleanest it's ever looked. Before then, you wouldn't be able to see clearly through there. It was all over.
And if you remember about a year ago, there was a bunch of media attention on this walkway. And part of that was when I went to the trustees trying to get this closed down. And there's all the construction in the neighborhood. Even parents didn't want their kids walking down there to catch the bus.
Just the neighborhood got the road redone, so at one point, all the kids had to go down the walkway, and they were
The parents were fuming, because I think that lasted like 2
I think that even
days.
stands like, you don't want parents walking the kids on there, you gotta think, we live next to that, day in and day out, so, you may not expect, she's right, there's good people that do walk over there, but it's not always the people in the neighborhood, it's people from other kids from the neighborhood come in and run out, and, it is what it is, and it's like if one bad season will spoil the whole bunch, and it's like, I've seen kids run down there and have a gun in his hip pocket, it's like, you call the police, like, hey, what the, it's just like that, absolutely.
And the things that happen through there are so quick that Colerain police can't even get there in time. By the time they get there, they're gone.
Yeah, it's like a wormhole.
Otherwise, in this neighborhood, there'd only be one way in and one way out through Jackie's.
And this neighborhood is a one-way, out, except for that walkway is a walkway.
The sneaky in and out.
I didn't even know it was there, actually.
Real quick,
Did you?
Marty, you mentioned that this walkway is supposed to be 10 feet Is that maintained by the township or is it a county maintained? Because my question is, wouldn't someone want to go in there and require that they have that 10-foot? I think they're making it so narrow that it is kind of secluding,
Yeah.
Creating that safety issue.
Yeah. Enclosed. It is township. This is not a county right-of-way. How it's maintained, I really didn't even ask the question.
I'm not sure. I know within the last year, we've seen people go back there a couple times and clean it out. Before all this started with the reports of the walkway, it was, nobody went back there. There was trash piled everywhere and just completely overgrown. There's no lighting down there. It's completely dark at night. You can't even see.
Have you requested to have lighting there?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And then for the record, that the fence is currently there, was there when we bought the house.
Right.
All I did to it, I painted it.
Right.
We'll take the chain link down and put up the 6-foot privacy all the way across the front like it is with the 8.
So I was doing that before that, I thought let that vegetation grow. I was like, I want some kind of privacy, so like I said, again, I was talking to mine, they leave you alone.
Well, one of the stipulations that Marty has in here is you have to be 5 feet off from the center of the sidewalk. Are you going to be able to do that? Because that's going to be beyond where your current fence is.
Wouldn't that also be an issue for everybody then, even their neighbor next to us?
Well, that's part of the stipulation that we have as far as allowing this privacy fence, is that you have to be 5 feet from the center of the sidewalk.
I'd rather move it to where it needs to be, can do it right by zoning laws, to have it.
It's only gonna be a couple feet.
Well, that's why I just want to make sure you guys are clear that when you put it in, it's not where your current fence is now. It's going to be further inside that.
So we'll measure 5 feet from the center
It's
of the
probably like,
sidewalk.
that's probably it's
Right.
probably only like maybe a foot off. I mean, it goes back pretty far.
So that's not going to be an issue. Okay.
And you're not having to remove any of those trees that are there or bushes?
On the left, there's no tree, it's just bush. It's just like-
Oh, okay, just bush, okay.
We just let it grow for.
Okay.
On the right side, I mean, that's all trees and honeysuckle trees. Ours, that's just bush, that's nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
Perfect.
So right there, the right side, there's no trees.
Okay. I don't have any further questions. Anybody else? We have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve with staff's condition.
Okay, motion's been made. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second's been made by Mr. Shup. Any questions? Discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Ranger?
Aye.
Mr. Shep?
Aye.
Mr. Berto?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Roberto?
Yes. Thank you, guys. Good luck to you. Sorry you had to be here so long.
That's okay, we got what we were doing. Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right, so I note in the agenda, there's no unfinished business. We need to approve the minutes from the July 24th meeting. Do we have a motion to approve?
I've got a comment.
Okay.
Page 3, fourth paragraph. It's mentioning my name when it should have been the applicant's name, clarifying a certain situation.
Need to make a correction on that.
So we'll.
So you'll amend that and correct it?
Yes.
Okay, so if that correction is made, does it, the report stand as approved?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll make a motion. Who's making the motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to include the correction as stated.
I'll second.
All right. Roll call vote.
Mr. Berto? Yes. Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Ranger?
Aye.
Mr. Shep?
Aye.
Mr. Roberto?
I'll abstain. All right, and the next meeting will be September 25th, 2019.
Have 2 cases for you.
Okay, we have 2 cases, and we will stand adjourned.
You will have a new planning director. From Hamilton.